when fire blazed down from heaven, when the chariots of fire and horses of fire lifted the teacher into the whirlwind, in the midst of that chaotic scene, something fell, a cloak. It was not just a lifeless piece of fabric. It was a calling, a legacy, a silent challenge dropping to the earth, waiting for a hand brave enough to reach out. There was no angelic voice, no word from the sky, just an old cloak lying on the ground. Yet that moment determined the destiny of a man. Who would pick it up? Who would dare to believe that the power is not in the cloth, but in the willingness to take on what it represents? Elisha stepped forward. No words, no music. He picked up the cloak, and all of heaven held its breath. Because what had just taken place was not merely a succession of office. It was the continuation of a sacred covenant. A covenant that began in Eden, was preserved by Seth, lifted by Enoch, passed on by Noah. The Book of Jubilees describes a lineage not merely chosen to perform miracles, but entrusted with the word, preserved to keep the heavenly calendar, live in holy seasons, and bear witness to the light in the darkness. In that view, Elisha picking up the cloak was no coincidence. It was the act of someone stepping into a divine lineage that existed long before Israel was born. He was not the beginning, he was the one who listened, who stepped forward while others only stared at the fire in fear. The cloak, falling from the hand of a man about to return to God, became a sign that God is still seeking someone to continue what he has started. And he's not looking for the famous, not for those with positions. He's looking for a soul willing to say, "Wherever you go, I will not leave you." The Book of Jubilees gives us a deeper dimension, that the covenant is not an event, but a rhythm passed down through generations. Each chosen one does not live for themselves, but keeps the flame alive for the one to come. As Seth was entrusted with the word after Abel's death, as Enoch walked with God in a fallen age, as Noah built the ark though rain had never fallen, Elisha picked up the cloak. But today's question is not for him, it's for you. If today the cloak falls at your feet, will you step forward, not to seek power, but to guard a covenant waiting to be upheld? The man who just called fire down from heaven, made all Israel fall on their faces and cry out, "The Lord, He is God," was the same man who ran in terror because of a queen's threat. Elijah, the mighty prophet of the Lord, had just consumed Baal's altar with one prayer, and now he asked God to let him die. Why? This should stop us in our tracks. Could it be that someone can be an instrument of miracles and yet still break inside? Could it be that what makes a person usable by God is not outer strength, but something deeper? Elijah stood alone against 850 false prophets, but collapsed in the wilderness because he felt alone. This is no surprise if we read the Book of Jubilees. The first people of the covenant, Adam, Enoch, Noah, were not perfect. Adam stumbled. Enoch lived in violent times. Noah was mocked by the whole world. But they were not disqualified. They were kept, not because they never failed, but because they turned back and kept walking. Elijah is proof of that truth. God does not only use the always strong, He uses those who know exhaustion, who fall on their faces and say, "It is enough, Lord." God didn't punish Elijah. He didn't scold him. He baked bread for him, let him sleep, and told him, "You are not alone. I have 7,000 who have not bowed to Baal." And perhaps, in that moment of fleeing, Elijah understood more than ever, that miracles don't change the world, but the covenant, kept quietly, does. Fire from heaven is a moment, but bread in the wilderness is enduring care. Elijah's story reminds us, God is not just the God of Mount Carmel, He is also the God of weary footsteps in the desert. If today you find yourself running, if you once did great things for God, but now just want to disappear, remember Elijah was there too, and God did not abandon him. The Book of Jubilees shows, no one is kept in the holy line because they are perfect. They are kept because they return, and so can you. Some stories do not stand alone, they are part of a flow. Some people don't appear like shooting stars, bright then gone, but like embers lit by the generation before, burning on for the next. Elijah was not the beginning. Elisha was not the end. They were just the next flames in a holy line God had established before Israel existed. The Book of Jubilees opens our eyes to a continuous thread. From Eden, God chose people to preserve the covenant, not through national status, but through holy living. Seth was appointed in place of Abel, so the holy seed would not be snuffed out. Enoch walked with God while the world drowned in chaos. Noah was saved not just to survive, but to pass down the sacred law. Abraham was chosen not for strength, but because he taught his children to keep the way. In that light, Elijah is not just a prophet in the era of kings. He is a flame-bearer of the patriarchs. He didn't just oppose Baal, he defended the covenant. He didn't just call the people back, he upheld the promise between God and the righteous. And Elisha, who picked up the cloak, did not just inherit an office. He stepped into a spiritual lineage, continuing the role of light keeper in darkness. When we view the cloak through the lens of Jubilees, it is no longer symbolic fabric. It is the transfer of sacred responsibility. Like when Enoch passed on writings about angels and the holy calendar to his sons, like when Noah charged Shem to keep the Sabbath and remain clean. Each generation has a cloak to pass on. And the receiver is not chosen for glory, but for faithfulness. That holy line in Jubilees is never broken by power or failure. It continues because someone dares to live differently. That's what made Elijah and Elisha stand out. They lived in a rebellious generation, but didn't let their fire go out. They were not lone heroes. They were covenant keepers, quiet, steadfast, ready to hand it off. And the question remains, who will be the next flame? Gehazi once saw the dead raised. He witnessed the oil never run dry, the poisoned water turn sweet and lepers healed. He was close to Elisha, the one who carried Elijah's cloak, close to power, close to the covenant, but he never entered in, because power is not transferred by proximity. The covenant doesn't soak through familiarity. The cloak does not fall for those who only stand near, but for those who dare to surrender. Gehazi didn't commit a great sin by human standards. He just ran after Naaman, just asked for a little silver, a few garments, just took a portion after a miracle. But that revealed something deeper, a heart not surrendered, a hunger to take, not to give, a career over a calling. And he bore leprosy, the mark of a soul unclean before the covenant. This uncleanness in the Book of Jubilees is not merely physical, but a severing from holy order. Some are born into the holy line, but are still cast out. Like the sons of Canaan, of Amalek, those who once knew God, but turned away. The covenant holds no one if their heart has departed. Elisha was different. When called, he didn't ask for time to think, didn't seek counsel. He slaughtered his oxen, burned the plow, cooked a farewell feast, and followed Elijah. Nothing left to return to, no plan B, no backup in case the calling failed. Elisha walked away with empty hands, but a full heart. And because of that, he was the one the cloak fell on, the one for whom the Jordan River parted, the one whose bones raised the dead, even in death. The story of Gehazi and Elisha asks a clear question. Why do you follow God? For reward or for the covenant? For power or for his presence? Because you saw a miracle or because you desire the one who performs them? The Book of Jubilees reminds us, those who are kept are those who live in holy seasons, obey sacred law, and do not veer from God's ways, even when no one is watching. And that's what the spiritual cloak seeks today, not the talented, but the ones with no way back. Will you dare to live like Elisha? Not just pick up the cloak, but live worthy of what it represents. Fire from heaven consumed the offering. Stones, water in the trenches, even the dust, vanished in a supernatural instant. The people fell on their faces, crying, "The Lord is God! The Lord is God!" A spiritual shockwave spread across Mount Carmel. It seemed like revival, a nation returning, a generation awakened. But just one chapter later, Elijah was fleeing for his life. There was no reform, no overthrow of the wicked queen, no temple rebuilt. Nothing changed. Jezebel still ruled. The people remained silent, and Elijah, the man of fire, sat alone under a broom tree, asking to die. Why? Why did such a great miracle fail to change hearts? The Book of Jubilees helps us understand. Miracles have never been what make people faithful. Previous generations saw the flood, saw angels destroy Sodom, saw the earth open to swallow rebels, yet they still worshipped idols, still strayed from the covenant, because what God seeks is not those temporarily amazed, but those enduringly loyal. Fire from heaven can consume the altar, but it cannot ignite the heart unless it is willingly offered. Israel may have shouted on the mountain, but they still bowed to Baal in the valley. They wanted a God who acted, not a Lord who demanded holiness. Elijah realized this, and he was crushed. He had risked everything to turn the people back. But what he saw was just a short-lived emotion, a performance, not a transformation. And that raises a painful but necessary question for us. How many times have we witnessed miracles, yet remained unchanged? How many times have we cried in worship, but lived double-minded outside church? The Book of Jubilees repeats a truth. Righteousness cannot endure without law and holy days. Miracles are confirmation. The covenant is the foundation. Elijah thought the miracle would be enough, but God is looking for covenant keepers, not performers. And today he is still asking, who will remain faithful when the fire has gone out? Elijah, the man who called down fire from heaven, is now sitting under a small bush in the desert, sighing and begging to die. Lord, it is enough. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. That cry did not come from a man of weak faith. It came from someone who had once stood alone against an empire, from the one who had just brought all Israel to its knees before the Lord. And yet now he collapses, not because of sword or spear, but from deep soul weariness. There's something in that scene that grips our hearts. A man so brave, now afraid. A man who had once faced 850 prophets of Baal, now fleeing from a single threat. But in that contradiction, Elijah becomes more relatable than ever, because he was not a superhuman. He was a man with limits, with emotions, with fears he couldn't even speak aloud. And it was in that very exhaustion that God drew near. He didn't rebuke him, didn't call him faithless, didn't command, "Get up and keep preaching." He sent an angel, baked bread, brought water, gently woke him. "Arise and eat." Not to send him back into battle, but to nourish him, then let him sleep again, then woke him again. This is a deep aspect of the covenant, revealed by the Book of Jubilees. God is not just the giver of law. He is the one who knows every cycle of weakness in those he calls. He doesn't reject the weary. He doesn't cast aside those who want to give up. He comes, he nourishes, and he leads them forward, just as he preserved Enoch, Noah, and Abraham through their most fragile moments. Elijah didn't collapse because he failed. He collapsed because he thought he was alone, thought the miracle had failed, thought no one was faithful anymore. And God healed him, not with victory, but with bread in the desert, with a whisper, "You are not alone." That story touches every heart weary in the journey of faith. Those who once walked with zeal, but now sit in silence, worn out. If you've ever been there, know that God doesn't wait for you to get stronger before he comes. He comes right into the fatigue. Because he doesn't just use those who burn bright, he also nourishes those whose flame is fading. Not in a temple, not with sacred trumpets, not surrounded by a crowd in worship. God chose to meet Elijah in the deepest point of exhaustion, in the desert. No sermon, no prophecy, no thunderous miracle, just a man under a tree asking to die, and an angel arriving not to scold, but to bring bread and water. Arise and eat, a simple phrase, but packed with unmeasurable love. When God sees a weary soul, he doesn't demand they get up right away. He doesn't require progress before restoration. He sends an angel, not to speak, but to bake. He cares for every meal. He lets Elijah sleep, then gently wakes him, then lets him rest again. There is a divine patience in that love, a tenderness full of strength. The Book of Jubilees repeatedly speaks of covenant seasons, sacred times in which people must live in rhythm. And Elijah, in his weariness, was brought back into his season, not through preaching, not through correction, but through bread and silence. The time of restoration is part of the holy journey. Even Enoch, who was taken up to heaven, lived 65 quiet years before stepping into his calling. Even Noah, who built the ark, waited years without a single sign from heaven. God does not despise human weariness. He does not place unrealistic expectations on those he calls. Elijah, the man who once called down fire, was now given baked bread by God. A contrasting image, but full of comfort, because in his weakness Elijah was not cast away. He was cared for. It was a holy kind of care, not loud, but powerful. The bread didn't fall like manna. It came from angel hands. The water didn't burst from a rock. It was placed right beside him. No flashy miracle, just every detail lovingly prepared. We live in an action-driven age, but this story shows sometimes the most sacred thing is not fire, but bread. Not the leap, but a God-given nap. And it was this quiet restoration that gave Elijah the strength to travel 40 days and nights to Mount Horeb. The deepest point of the desert became the place God was closest. That's holy paradox. And if today you feel like you're in a dry land, no more voice, no more strong faith, remember, God may be sending an angel not to speak, but to bake. Maybe the moment you want to give up is the very moment the covenant is leading you deeper. Elijah was not rejected because he was tired. He was chosen to continue after being nourished. And so are you. The desert is not the end of the story. It is the place where God bakes bread for the next part of the journey. On Mount Carmel, Elijah did what every prophet dreams of, made the people bow, made the king witness God's power, exposed and destroyed the idols. But days later, he was alone in the wilderness. No one followed, no religious revolution came, no change in the palace. Jezebel still ruled. The people were still silent, and Elijah sat there, blaming himself. I've done everything, and still they won't return. In despair, he poured out his heart to God. I have been very zealous for you, Lord, but the Israelites have broken the covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Elijah thought the covenant had failed because the crowds turned away, but God doesn't see as man sees, because the covenant was never built on the crowd. God answered Elijah with a statement that redirected history. I have preserved 7,000 who have not bowed to Baal or kissed him. No one knew who they were. They weren't prominent. They didn't speak on Mount Carmel, but they existed quietly, steadfastly, keeping the covenant in a rebellious world. The Book of Jubilees repeats this across generations. There is always a remnant, people not swayed by surrounding culture. They keep the holy days while others forget. They live clean while society grows filthy. They obey the covenant, not because of visible results, but because they know the one who gave it. Many think faith is about popularity, that if an entire nation returns to God, that's revival. But Jubilees shows true revival begins with the quiet and the faithful, not with big miracles, but with lasting surrender, not with loud crowds, but with one person keeping the Sabbath when all others ignore it. God corrected Elijah's perspective. He was no longer tasked with changing the people. He was given the responsibility to anoint the next, Elisha, because the covenant does not end just because the majority stop believing. It continues through those who don't give up, and that is what God is still doing today. He's not seeking the masses. He's seeking those willing to hold the cloak when no one's watching, those who keep believing when there are no results, those who keep praying when prayer feels useless, because they know God does not ask for success, He asks for faithfulness. So if you've ever felt too small to be used by God, if you've ever felt alone, unsupported, unheard, remember God's words to Elijah, I have preserved 7,000. And maybe you are one of them. one of the covenant keepers quietly preserved for the next generation. There was a sacred moment on the banks of the Jordan River where two men prepared to part, one about to be taken into heaven and the other about to step into the loneliness of prophetic ministry. Elijah turned to Elisha and asked, "Before I am taken from you, what can I do for you?" That question held all the possibilities of a calling, but what Elisha asked for was not safety nor honor. He said, "Let me receive a double portion of your spirit." Not everyone dares to ask such a thing. A double portion is not just double power, but double burden, double testing, double loneliness. What Elisha wanted was not a position, but the full path Elijah had walked. He didn't want a piece of the cloak. He wanted the whole fire. He didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be consumed by the same Spirit. And Elijah replied, "You have asked a hard thing, but if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be granted." This was not something Elijah could give. It was something God would do if Elisha truly remained faithful to the end. That moment revealed a desire without compromise. Elisha didn't follow Elijah to learn a few sermons. He followed to become part of the covenant. That can't be transferred by words, only by fire. The Book of Jubilees describes many generations being entrusted with the word, but not all received it. Many were born into holy lines, but never asked for the Spirit. They lived around the calling, but never stepped in. Elisha was different. He asked for much because he gave much. He burned the yoke, slaughtered the oxen, left the plow, so he'd have no way back. Elisha's request forces us to ask ourselves, when standing before the sacred cloak, what would we ask for? A small piece of safety, a bit of light to avoid getting lost, or the double portion, even knowing it would cost us everything? Elisha asked for what no one else dared, and that's what made him the true successor. Not because he was more worthy, but because he was more hungry. In a world content with just enough, Elisha reminds us, the covenant continues through hearts that will not settle. Those who dare to stand at the river and ask for the whole fire. Elijah had no biological children. He had no tribe to inherit the prophetic mantle, but he had Elisha, a disciple, a servant, not of his bloodline, but of his same faithfulness. When Elisha followed Elijah, there were no promises of power or glory, just dusty roads, rejected towns, and long nights without thanks. But Elisha kept following, not by blood, but by commitment. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes that the covenant is not passed through biology, but through holiness. Not everyone born into a holy line keeps the light. Some were sons of the patriarchs, but turned away. Some bore the sacred lineage, but chose to live like pagans. The covenant doesn't run automatically through veins. It requires a soul willing to guard it, a life willing to respond. Elijah did not pass his spirit to anyone in the crowd, only to Elisha. Because the one entrusted with power is not the one who stands closest, but the one who surrenders the deepest. Elisha held no title, but he was willing to give up everything, and that's what made him the chosen one. This also explains why Gehazi, Elisha's servant, did not inherit the cloak. Even though he was near, even though he witnessed every miracle, his heart was not holy. He wanted the reward, but not the responsibility. He desired the position, but not the anointing. And in the end, he received nothing but exposure. God's power is not an heirloom. It cannot be passed down by will. It's not found in systems, but in souls. Not in rosters, but in surrendered lives. God does not choose based on bloodlines, but on faithfulness, on who keeps the covenant when no one is watching. And that's a sobering truth for us today. You may have been born into a godly family. You may have served in church for years. You may stand close to the anointed. But if your life is not sanctified, if your soul is not surrendered, you will not inherit anything. The Book of Jubilees is clear. Only those who live according to the holy law, keep the sacred calendar, and walk in the path God has appointed, are preserved in the covenant line. This is not to exclude anyone, but to invite everyone. Live like Elisha. You don't need a name. You don't need a position. All you need is a soul quiet enough to hear, brave enough to follow, and faithful enough to be entrusted with the cloak. On the banks of the Jordan, Elisha stood alone. Elijah had been taken up in the whirlwind and the chariots of fire. The sky was no longer roaring. The signs had faded. Only the sound of the wind remained, and a cloak lying silently on the ground. Elisha picked it up. All eyes watched, but no one knew what would happen next. He stepped toward the river, the same river Elijah had just struck with the cloak, parting the waters. Now everyone waited. Was Elisha merely a faithful servant, or truly the anointed one? He took the cloak, rolled it up, just as his master had done. But before he struck the water, he cried out, "Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" This was not a question of doubt. It was the cry of someone stepping into the void, believing that if God had done it before, he would do it again. And then the water parted. There was no thunder, no roar from heaven, just the river quietly moving aside before a man truly anointed. Elisha crossed over, and the sons of the prophets watching from afar exclaimed, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." But in truth, they only confirmed what the miracle had already declared, that God had chosen. That power did not ascend into heaven with Elijah, but was now flowing through the one willing to carry the cloak. The Book of Jubilees is clear. The sign of someone belonging to the covenant is confirmation from God himself, not outward status. When Noah was chosen, no one affirmed him, only an ark in a world that mocked. When Enoch walked with God, no one bore witness, only a disappearance that baffled the earth. And when Elisha parted the Jordan, it wasn't just a repetition of a miracle. It was heaven's affirmation that he did not walk alone. That power is not dependent on Elijah, but on the covenant, carried forward by surrendered souls. That moment forces us to ask, are miracles waiting for anointing? Or is the anointing waiting for someone bold enough to step toward the miracle? If you're standing before your own Jordan, a major decision, a difficult calling, an impassable situation, remember the image of Elisha. Miracles don't come to observers. They come to those who dare to cry, "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" and strike the water with the very cloak of faith they have picked up. And then the water will part. Not because you are strong, but because you are anointed. Years after Elisha died, his body was laid in a simple tomb. There were no fiery chariots, no parted rivers, no booming voice, just a body returned to dust. It seemed the story had ended, but for those who carry the covenant, nothing truly ends. In a moment of chaos, as Moabite raiders invaded, a group of men hurriedly buried a dead man. When they saw the enemy approaching, they threw the body into Elisha's tomb without a second thought. What happened next silenced history. When the body touched Elisha's bones, the dead man came back to life. He stood up. He walked. No one preached. No one prayed. There was no special gathering, just a bone and a body. And a miracle occurred. Why? Because the covenant doesn't end when someone dies. The anointing does not decay with the body. The presence of God, if it truly dwelled in someone, leaves a trace. Elisha did not rise, but through him another did. His final miracle did not happen during his life, but after he could no longer speak, preach, or move. The Book of Jubilees reveals this early on. Those chosen by God, their mark is not just in words, but in presence. The covenant line doesn't flow through noise, but through those who live in season, in rhythm, and in holy law. They leave echoes, they leave impressions, they shake time, even in physical absence. And if Elisha's bones could bring the dead to life, then we must ask, what is our soul leaving behind? When you can no longer speak, what in your life will still echo? If you are truly anointed, then even silence can give birth to life. This story stuns us, but it also awakens something. The anointing is not a fleeting emotion, it is saturation, a holy residue that lingers even after the vessel is gone. Elisha did not make that miracle happen. God did it through him. Because he didn't just carry the covenant, he lived as if he was part of it. And you can live that way too, a life that, even in death, still releases power. Not so others will praise you, but so they might live again because of the one you carried daily. The covenant, if it truly dwells in you, will not go silent even when you do. Elisha died. There were no chariots of fire, no whirlwind carrying him to heaven like Elijah. His death came in silence, a quiet ending to a life that was anything but quiet. There was no great farewell crowd, just a king weeping by his bed, calling him, "My father, my father," the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And then, a grave, silence, dust. But the covenant is not measured by moments of glory. It is proven by faithfulness in every season. Elijah was taken in fire because he completed a disruptive journey. Elisha was buried, but what he planted bore fruit long after he was gone. The difference was not the reward, but how God fulfills his promises in each person's sacred season. The Book of Jubilees makes it clear. Each person has their appointed time placed within the timeline of God's order. Enoch was taken because he lived fully righteous in a corrupt generation. Noah was preserved to endure a season of judgment. Abraham was given the covenant in a season of breakthrough for many nations. No one's journey is the same, but God forgets no one. He sees who lives in season and places his fire at the appointed time. Elisha was that kind of man. He didn't need to be taken up in fire because he was the one who kept the fire until his last breath. He didn't need a final miracle on his deathbed because his whole life was a continuous miracle of obedience. No promise was forgotten, no flame went out. God kept his word by letting a dead man live again, just to prove the covenant still continues. The final fire is not in a moment. It is in the continuity. Today's world chases after flashy flames, sensational moments, quick emotional highs. But the covenant is not looking for those who impress. It is looking for those who keep the fire, even if it's a small one, through all the rain, darkness, and doubt. Elisha is the image of a fire keeper. And when he died, God let one last flame burst out, not to glorify him, but to confirm this: those who live in season will never be forgotten. If you are living in a long stretch with no miracles, no results, no audible voice from God, remember this: you may be living in your appointed season. And that sacred season is being written into the covenant so that one day someone might touch the portion of your life left behind and come alive. Because true fire doesn't have to burn brightly to still be fire. True fire only needs to keep burning. And God has never allowed his fire to die out in those who dare to keep the covenant to the end. The final flame is not the one that dazzles, it is the one that never goes out. And perhaps you are the one holding that flame for the next generation. The cloak is no longer in Elisha's tomb, nor is it in Elijah's hand, who was taken up in glory. It fell, it was picked up, it was used, it parted the Jordan, it touched the dead, it raised the lifeless. It carried dozens of miracles. But in the end, the cloak once again grew silent. No one saw it again. No one mentioned it. No one knew where it lay. But perhaps the question isn't, where is it now? But, who will pick it up again? Because the story isn't over. The lineage hasn't stopped. The covenant hasn't closed. God is still searching for those willing, not to shine, but to carry on. Not to be seen, but to keep the light from going out. The Book of Jubilees records that in every generation, God always preserved a few, the remnant, whose names were unknown, uncelebrated, unwritten in history. But they were the ones who kept the covenant when the whole world had abandoned it. They didn't need praise, they didn't need confirmation. They just needed a word, and they walked. Elisha was one of those people. He didn't need to foresee the future. He didn't need the trumpet blast of an angel. All he needed was to see a cloak fall, and he understood, it's my turn. How many cloaks have you seen fall? How many once burned with the fire of faith, then faded into silence? How many sacred rolls once rang out, then were left empty? Maybe you've only stood and watched. Maybe you've thought, I'm not worthy. But Elisha was never anointed by any counsel. He just stepped forward. And now the spiritual cloak is falling in your generation. No one is forcing you. No one is assigning you. But God is asking, do you want to step into the covenant line? This doesn't mean you'll become a prophet, a missionary, or a church leader, but maybe you'll be the one who keeps the flame burning in your family, the one who won't let your children grow up without knowing holiness, the one who dares to live in season when no one else around you does, the one who chooses to keep the holy day, keep a holy heart, keep worship alive when all of society slips away from it. And when you do that, you are stepping into the lineage. You're not starting the story, but you're continuing it. And maybe your life will be the invitation for someone else to follow. Elisha never had a famous sermon, but he had a life of uninterrupted devotion. and God used him to raise the dead. So you, the one reading, reflecting, wondering, could I be that person? The answer isn't in your ability, it's in your decision. The cloak is falling, no one else is picking it up. Will you step forward? You may not stand out. You may never be mentioned in a sermon. You may never stand on a stage, never have thousands of followers, never see miracles happen at your hands. But if you are living a faithful life, if you quietly hold to the covenant, still pray when no one else prays, still walk with God when others walk away, then you need to know this: God knows your name. Elijah once thought he was the last one left. On Mount Horeb he cried out, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, but the Israelites have torn down your covenant, broken your altars, killed your prophets. I alone am left." That was the voice of someone who had given everything and believed he was alone. But God answered with a stunning truth: "I have kept 7,000 for myself, who have not bowed to Baal." Elijah didn't know them. Their names weren't in history, no miracles were attached to them, but God knew. He counted them. He kept them. In the darkness, they held the covenant. In the silence, they lived in sacred rhythm. The Book of Jubilees repeats this image. Through every corrupt generation, God always preserves a remnant, not because they're perfect, but because they don't turn away. They're not heroes, but they're steadfast. And it is these people who cause the covenant to continue. If you feel unknown, living out a faith no one sees, then you are living proof that the covenant hasn't been forgotten. You are a living witness to a truth the world tries to erase, that God is still worthy of love, of worship, of obedience, even without reward. And remember this: God never forgets those who don't forget him, those who keep the holy law, though no one acknowledges them, those who live the sacred calendar, though they are mocked, those who continue praying when it seems no prayer is answered. God knows your name, just as he knew the names of the 7,000, just as he remembered every generation who held the covenant in Jubilees. And he will keep you, not to showcase you, but to write a holy story through your life. Because the covenant doesn't need a spotlight. It only needs someone who dares to be faithful, even when no one sees. And maybe you are that someone. Maybe you're living a very ordinary life. Each day passes the same. Going to work, caring for family, carrying quiet responsibilities, no applause, no obvious signs. Maybe you don't think of yourself as the kind of person God uses, but Elisha was just like that. When Elijah found him, what was Elisha doing? Plowing a field, his hands covered in dirt, his shoulders soaked in sweat. Nothing in that scene said, "This is the successor to one of the greatest prophets in history." No one predicted it. No one waited for it. No one trained Elisha to carry the cloak. But he was called, not because of background, but because of willingness. And the first thing Elisha did wasn't to serve miracles. He served Elijah in silence, in faithfulness, no spotlight, no platform. He followed because he knew whom he was following. And when Elijah was about to be taken, Elisha didn't ask for an honorary reward. He asked for a double portion of the Spirit. That didn't show ambition. It showed hunger. I don't want to live a halfway faith. I want everything God gave the one before me so I can carry forward what's been entrusted to me. And you, the one watching this, can be the next. Not in title, but in spiritual responsibility. In a generation where the holy fire is fading, God is still seeking those who will keep the flame. In a time when everyone chases reward, God is seeking those who long for the Spirit. The Book of Jubilees makes it clear. God always passes on the covenant through those who are willing to receive it, not the prominent, but the pure in heart. He doesn't choose by bloodline, but by faithfulness. From Adam to Seth, from Enoch to Noah, from Abraham to Jacob, not one was perfect, but all responded. And if you're asking, could I? The answer is yes. You don't need extraordinary talent. You don't need church pedigree. You don't need spiritual credentials. You only need to dare to burn the plow. Like Elisha, let go of the oxen, leave the familiar field, and step into a journey with no guarantee, except that God called you. You could be the one keeping the fire in your home when everyone else grows cold. You could be the one who speaks a word of life when co-workers only complain. You could be the one who revives faith in a weary community, and you could be the one God uses to carry on a holy covenant passing through the generations. Elisha wasn't extraordinary, except in his willingness, and that was more than enough. And today, if your heart is stirring, if your ears hear a quiet call, know this: maybe the cloak is falling, and God is watching. Who will step forward? You could be the next Elisha. No one may recognize you now, but all of heaven is watching. And God, the one who sees in secret, will be the one to place the Spirit upon you, if you're willing to receive it. We often think that to be used by God, we must hold some special status: a pastor, a preacher, someone from a holy lineage, or someone with impressive spiritual achievements. But that's not true. The story of Elisha is clear evidence. God doesn't seek status. He seeks surrender. Elisha wasn't the son of a prophet. No one called him the chosen one from birth. He was just a farmer living quietly in the fields. But when Elijah threw the cloak across his shoulders, he understood, and he responded with decisive action, slaughtering the oxen, burning the plow, hosting a farewell feast to his past. No turning back, no regret, no debate, just one decision: to walk toward the call. The Book of Jubilees makes it clear. God's selection doesn't come from lineage, position, or influence. It comes from those who keep His laws when no one else does. Those who live in sacred rhythm, even if no one affirms it. These people, though nameless, are recorded in the covenant line. They are the ones God preserves for Himself. So if you're thinking, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I don't have a spiritual background, let the story of Elisha break that shame. The only thing God seeks in you is not ability, but surrender. A ready heart, an unhesitating step, a yes, even when you don't know what's ahead. You don't need a title. You only need a soul that responds. You don't need a stage. You don't need thousands of followers. You don't need a flawless spiritual resume. You just need to wake up each morning and say, Lord, today I am ready. Every time you hear the call, don't turn away. Elisha didn't need the title successor prophet. He only needed to see the cloak fall, and he stepped forward. God used him, not because he was great, but because he was surrendered. And if you do the same, He will use you too. Not to do grand things before the world, but to write the next part of a sacred covenant only you were made to carry. If the covenant is a sacred book, not written in ink, but in the lives of those who believe, then what title will the chapter you are living today carry? Giving up, waiting for a sign, or still walking, though I see nothing? The story from the Book of Jubilees shows us the covenant isn't only written through great events, but etched by steady, quiet steps. When Adam repented in the dust, when Enoch silently walked with God, when Noah waited 100 years for the first drop of rain, when Abraham believed in a promise with no timeline. Each action, each small choice, was a line in the chapter of the covenant life. So you, today, what are you writing? Maybe you're in the chapter called Forgotten. No one sees, no one remembers, no one applauds. You pray in secret. You reject compromise in solitude. You hold to faith in a world that mocks it. But remember, Elijah once wrote that chapter, and so did Elisha. On a plowed field, no one noticed. Maybe you're in the chapter called Running, not because of weak faith, but exhaustion. You've believed, you've prayed, you've served, but seen no change. You feel you have nothing left to give. Elijah once wrote that chapter under a tree in the wilderness, asking to die. But it was in that chapter that God sent an angel, baked bread, and opened a new path. Or maybe you are in the chapter called Ready. Ready to pick up the cloak that's falling in this generation. Ready to say, grant me a double portion of your spirit. Not to stand out, but to serve. Ready to break the plow, slaughter the oxen, so there's no way back, and step into a journey only the covenant can lead. No one else can write this for you. No one can live faith on your behalf. But each day, each choice, each quiet act is a sentence in the chapter you are writing. And one day when you look back, you'll see no chapter is meaningless if it's written in faithfulness. God is not waiting for you to do something great. He is waiting for you to live honestly, not to perform miracles, but to keep walking when there are none, not to preach powerful sermons, but to pray silently when no one else does, not to prophesy aloud, but to stay loyal in the darkest of days. So, is the chapter you are living today worthy to be called part of the covenant? Pause for a moment. Look at your life. Maybe you are in the middle chapter. No climax, no ending, just silence. But even silence can be sacred if you're still faithful. And God, the one who remembered every remnant, will write your name into the next part of the covenant, still being written until the final day. We're living in a time much like the days of Ahab and Jezebel, when truth is distorted, when false worship reigns, and hearts waver between idols. This isn't just ancient history, it's the present reality. Corruption isn't only in politics or society, it's creeping into spiritual life. And in such times, God isn't looking for a new system. He's looking for people who will wear the cloak, not a physical cloak, but the cloak of faithfulness. A life forged in silence, in testing, in the rejection of fame, and willing to walk without applause. Elisha received the cloak not to be celebrated, but to stand in the midst of a lost generation and remind them of the covenant. He healed, he raised the dead, he purified the poisoned, he listened, he stood before power, not by his own strength, but by the quiet flame burning in his heart. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes this. Every era has those who are preserved. They are Enoch's, Noah's, Abraham's, not born in ideal times, but born at the right moment, when light is needed most. They don't run from darkness, but are placed in the middle of it by God to keep the fire from going out. This generation needs the same, not more words, but more people living the covenant. Not more strategies, but more surrendered souls. Not more spiritual performance, but those who pray when no one sees, forgive when no one understands, keep walking when no one else joins. You could be that person. You don't need to be chosen by people. God has already called you. You don't need a physical cloak, just a heart that listens. And if you're carrying a holy invitation in your soul, don't ignore it. You might be an Elisha for this generation, a generation dying of thirst for holiness, a generation blind to truth, a generation led by counterfeit power. And in that darkness, God doesn't use the crowd. He uses those who carry the cloak. Put it on, hold it tight, and walk, because this generation is waiting for your presence. You are not the light, but you carry the light. And maybe that's what will change the trajectory of a generation that has forgotten the covenant. On Mount Carmel, when Elijah prayed, fire fell from heaven. It consumed the offering, the stones, the dust, and the water in the trench. The people fell face down, shouting, "The Lord, He is God." But just one chapter later, Elijah was running. The people were silent again, and the heavens quieted. The fire doesn't fall forever. Miracles don't continue endlessly. Grace has its timing, and the one called must step into the fire while the fire is still burning. Elisha didn't wait for Elijah to return. He didn't demand perfect timing. When he saw the cloak fall, he stepped forward, because he knew spiritual opportunity doesn't repeat. It was a brief moment, but it would decide the entire spiritual destiny of a man. If Elisha had hesitated, if he waited for a council of prophets to affirm him, if he waited for the right feeling, the cloak would have been carried away by the wind. The Book of Jubilees emphasizes that God acts in sacred seasons, divine moments that don't follow human calendars but heavenly rhythms. Those who live in season, in the covenant, step into the fire. Those who hesitate will watch it fade and never be ignited. What season are you in? If you're feeling a stirring inside, know this: it's not a fleeting emotion. It might be a calling, a sacred whisper saying, "It's time to walk." Don't wait for acceptance. Don't wait for everyone to support you. Don't wait until you feel holy enough. The cloak is falling, the fire is burning, but it won't burn forever. Step into the flame before the silence returns. Don't just tell the story of Elisha. Live your story. If God is awakening you, then this world is waiting for the footsteps of someone awakened. No one can walk it for you. No one can wear the cloak for you. No one can pray your prayers. Write it down. I am ready to walk. Pray this: Lord, grant me a double portion of your Spirit. And live as though today is the day the cloak will fall. Because if you don't step into the fire today, who will hold the covenant for the generation to come? Amen.